She's back. Sedona Prince back with the women's basketball team as they extend their winning streak to 3 in a row. Plus, the men get a much-needed blowout win of Cincinnati over the weekend, and TCU baseball breaks out the brooms for the second weekend in a row, sweeping a ranked UCLA back to California. We're going to break it all down right now on this episode of Frogs Insider. Hello and welcome in to another episode of Frogs Insider. Jamie Plunkett here alongside Melissa Treebwasser as always. Melissa, it was a wild weekend in TCU athletics. Like all weekend, it was just like game after game after game, event after event. And it seems like TCU pretty much won every single one of them.
Yeah, I mean, it was a banner weekend, to say the least, for the Horned Frogs and the fan base.
It was. I found myself like trying to plan out my Saturday because there was a basketball game for the men's team at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. Baseball was at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then the women's team played at 6 o'clock in the evening. And so I'm like, in my head, I'm like, okay, well, I know I'm going to be at baseball and it's a small press box. So I'm going to go drop my stuff off there, then walk over to men's game for a little bit. And then hopefully baseball will be over in time to get back over to the women's game. And so I showed up at the baseball stadium at like noon, 4 hours before first pitch. And I walk in the press box and there are a couple like TCU marketing folks, some video folks in there. They're like, why are you here right now? I was like, guys, I'm on that grind. I'm on the grind. I've got to stay on top, right? Never stop grinding. That's the mantra. But I dropped my stuff off there, walked over to basketball for a little bit, saw our good friend Colin Post, who was in town running the Cowtown Marathon.
Shout out to Colin with the PR.
Shout out to Colin for a personal record running that Cowtown Marathon. Hyped for him to do that. That's such a cool accomplishment. And watched some really good basketball, watched some incredibly good baseball, and unfortunately did not make it back over to see Sedona Prince's return to the court after 11 games played with a broken finger. But the ladies took care of business, beating Houston 59-49. So that was a nice little win there as well.
I've had a couple of Saturdays that have seen me very much planted in front of a television or my phone for much of the day, watching just consecutive hours of TCU athletics. And it's been and have not lost in either of those. I mean, that's 2 straight Saturdays where men's, women's basketball have both won, baseball has won. It's been pretty good run there for the Horned Frogs. And then beach volleyball also got a nice win on the road Saturday as well.
Took down a ranked LSU along with a couple other opponents as well to go 4-0 on the weekend. Pretty sweet. Shout out to Hector Gutierrez and his squad. He's got those players absolutely at the peak of the game, which is pretty dope. Melissa, we're going to talk about a lot tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about football media availability because we actually got to talk to some players last week. That was pretty cool. We're going to break down the men and women's basketball games from this weekend. We're going to talk about TCU sweeping UCLA. I'm really excited to dive into all of that. But I got to start with something that happened on Twitter today where our overlords, I guess, for a lack of a better phrase, over at Dave Campbell's Texas Football. If you're a first time listener, we are part of a Dave Campbell's Texas Football Republic of Football Network. You can find our podcast along with the podcast for every other D1 program in the state of Texas at Republic of Football. Wherever you search for your podcasts, you'll find all of our shows in one stream there. But we there was a little bit of controversy in the network today because the Baylor podcast, of course it's the Baylor podcast, right? Of
course it's Baylor podcast.
Titled their most recent podcast episode the same thing that all of these like porn bots on Twitter are spamming people's replies with. Mm-hmm. And one of our I want to admit I didn't really know what was going on, and now that makes sense why I didn't know. That's it. Yeah, I'm not going to say that those are targeted ads, but hey, we don't control what the bots do.
Sure,
right? I mean, last year I was every single baseball game. Poor TCU baseball admin. All the folks that run that Twitter account were just getting their tweets spammed by the same little porn bot just over and over and over again. So I don't think that they have targeted victims. I think their reign of terror is wide sweeping.
Listen,
but
as someone in marketing, you know that if you start talking about something and then you're gonna, like, one of my favorite stories to tell is I had a friend who's a little bit older than me, like maybe 10, 15 years older, and she was asking, she was like, I'm getting the weirdest ads on my Facebook. I was like, what are these ads for, friend? And she said, banana hammocks.
Oh, did she?
And we reminded her that your search habits dictate the advert. So I didn't go farther into the conversation. I'm not trying to insinuate anything here. I'm just saying.
She had a Jason Whitlock moment.
Yeah, I was not familiar with the between, and also I think this is the Between Two Bears episode I'm on, which also is hilarious. They did bring me in this week to talk about Gary Patterson and some basketball. We previewed the game and different things like that. So this is all, now that I know why this was such a problem. I'm more. I find it hilarious and delightful that it happened today.
Well, Ishmael Johnson from DCTF tweeted, "You're all fired" at the Baylor motley crew of the Between Two Bears podcast. I don't know that. So rest in peace. We might be looking for a new Baylor podcast. So if you've got one,
opening,
if you've got one, hit up Ishmael Johnson over at Dave Campbell's Texas Football. But yes, we are the part of the Republic of Football Network. Dave Campbell's Texas Football is a wonderful partner with us here at Frogs Insider. We are also sponsored by Hell's Half Acre Stadium Goods and Home Field Apparel, of whom we will speak highly of later on in the episode. Love both of those companies, love both of the people behind those companies. Very excited to partner with them as well. But right now, right here, Melissa, we need to talk about Josh Hoover.
Yeah.
Because Josh Hoover was one of the guys that we got to talk to this week at Football Media Availability, because it's getting close. We're about a month away from spring ball picking up and getting rolling, 2 months away from the spring game. And obviously football can't just let basketball and baseball have all of the attention and momentum. Got to get some football guys in there. So Josh Hoover, Nambi Obiazor, Dom Williams were three guys that we got to talk to. JP Richardson was another guy that we got to talk to in the middle of last week. And I say this not to overhype or oversell or over anything Josh Hoover heading into spring ball. But Josh Hoover does a very good Max Duggan impression in front of a microphone. And what I mean by that is he is always hesitant to take credit and always quick to credit others. He talked about accountability. He talked about leadership. He talked about responsibility and pulling in the right direction. And I was really impressed with how he carried himself in this presser. And I know what you might be listening to this and thinking, Jamie, it was a press availability in February. Like, who really cares? Well, I think it's important because when we get to talk to a lot of these kids, and when you talk to as many of these players that we have talked to over the decade plus that we've been doing this, you can kind of pick up on who's kind of a natural leader and who maybe needs to really work at it. And every sense that I have gotten in my interactions with Josh Hoover, and I'm sure you feel the same way from when you've come into town, is that he has that kind of innate ability to get guys to listen and follow him. And he said everything right this week. He talked about being a leader. He talked about accountability, meaning that you have to have hard conversations with people sometimes. And he talked about the work that he's done this offseason to be a better quarterback on the field as well. And I came away from that press availability very impressed with Josh Hoover. It sounded like he had grown even from this past fall, where he was also very well spoken and very thoughtful. And I just thought it was really cool that they kind of rolled him out. I know that the last few years there's been quarterback competitions and someone's got to win the job. And it really does feel like they're trying to treat Josh Hoover as the incumbent moving into 2024, which he is.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if maybe there's going to be a little bit of a different attitude about the quarterback position from TCU this upcoming year.
I mean, I'll say a couple of things. Number one, if Josh Hoover is not the guy, TCU football is in big trouble for 2024.
Sure.
Not to speak poorly on Ken Seals, but there's enough tape. Hey, he was playing at Vanderbilt. Like, we'll give him some grace here or there, but we know who he is, right? And then we also know what we've seen out of Josh Hoover in limited sample size, but he's put up some pretty impressive numbers against some good teams. And then if he's not the guy and you're looking, you're clamoring for the true freshman, I think TCU's in big trouble. So yeah, I think he should be treated as the starter. I think he also can handle that without. It's not going to lessen his work ethic. It's not going to lessen his effort. It's not going to lessen him going out there and trying to win the job, even if he knows he's already won it. So I don't worry about that whatsoever. The other thing I'll say, and I don't know if I ever told this story on the podcast, but I think I might have dropped it in the chat, is I think I was coming back from the Colorado game, and I ended up sitting down at the gate next to the player of a walk-on who's from my area, and she was talking about, she brought up Josh Hoover. And at that time, he hadn't really played a snap, and he wasn't much of a known quantity on that team. And she said, yeah, me and my son and everything I've heard from him is that he's really impressed with this Hoover kid and thinks he's the future at TCU and that he's going to be a guy. He came in, the walk-ins came in the summer. Josh spent time not only introducing himself to every walk-on, but making sure he knew their names. He showed up to every workout. He was doing extra reps with guys. He was working out with the walk-ons to make sure that they felt like they were a part of the team. And she said that her son was so impressed by that a kid who's a quarterback and has been in the program for a year was still making sure that every single person that showed up on that campus and was handed a TCU football something felt like they were part of that program. And that kind of spoke to his character. And she is someone who was like, I really think that kid's going to be the guy at some point, whether it's this season or next season. So I think that we all want him to be great. I don't think there's a TCU fan on the planet that doesn't want Josh Hoover to be the kid we saw in the second half of a lot of games. I think there's still a lot of questions about what kind of quarterback he can be as the game in, game out starter. But I think he does all of the intangibles well. He does all the off the field stuff well. And he's clearly flashed the talent that could make him a really good quarterback in the new look Big 12 in the future. So I'm excited for him to go into the spring as QB1, to get the reps, to get the work with the first team, to continue to build the chemistry with a guy like JPR that you mentioned, with Savion Williams, who seems so exceptionally bought in this offseason in a way that I don't know that we've really seen from him. And I just hope to God that we have the offensive line and the running game to help him maximize his ability and talent.
Yeah, those are the big questions. It does make you feel good, though, when you have a guy like John Paul Richardson step up to the mic right after Josh Hoover and sing his quarterback's praises. Richardson spent a lot of time talking about two things. He talked about the comfortability of the offense in year two under Kendall Briles, which Hoover mentioned as well. He said this is the first spring that he doesn't, in like 3 years, where he doesn't have to learn a new offense and learn a new playbook. And I think that might go a long way to some continuity for this offense this season. And then Richardson talked a lot about how, he and Hoover have grown really close this offseason, how they hang out a lot, how they really like each other's company, how they're learning and working with each other. And he's another one that talked a lot about accountability and wanting everyone to, or needing how this team needs everyone to be pulling in the same direction. That was a common theme throughout all four of the guys that we talked to last week, was they all talked about accountability. They all talked about needing everyone to be fully bought in. And Nnamdi Obiezor had a really interesting thing that he said, and it made me think back to something that Nick Saban said one time about getting the right guys on the bus. Nick Saban was at this, I don't remember what the context was. He was at a conference where he was talking to coaches or something. He says, spring is about me trying to figure out how to get the right guys on the bus, identifying who the right guys are to be on the bus, what seats they need to be sitting in. And then it's also about getting the wrong guys off the bus. And I think that's one of the things that's overlooked about Nick Saban's career, is that he was so good at getting the wrong guys off the bus and making sure that everybody that was on the bus was pulling in the right direction and 100% bought in.
Also easy to do when you know the guy that you're kicking off the bus is going to be replaced by another 5-star guy to get on the bus. But it's a little bit, it's tougher, I think, in a program like TCU. And I think that might have been part of the issue last season, is that when the wrong guys are still some of the most talented guys, you've got to make a tough decision as a coach. Like, how much extra rope do you give a guy that might be better than the guy behind him when you're trying to win football games, keep your job and all those things. And Saban was really, really great at that, but he also recruited at a level where it was really, really easy for him to say, just go. I don't care. I will replace you with someone equally as good or better. I think it's harder to do when you're not, a blue blood or a top 10, top 15 recruiting team annually.
I hear what you're saying there. But to go back to what Namdi was saying last week, what reminded me of that Saban speech was the fact that he said, we're still trying to figure out who really wants to be here.
Yeah.
He said something along the lines of, we're trying to get everybody on the bus, or not on the bus, but we're trying to get everybody in the same boat, is essentially what he said. And he indicated that there are still maybe some guys on the team right now that aren't fully bought in, that have to decide whether or not this is where they want to be. And I found it really interesting that a player would come out into a press conference and say something like that, because normally, even if you know that there's some turmoil in the locker room, guys will come out and they'll just say, hey, we're down right now, but we're fighting. We're all still bought in. We're all still, this, that, and the other. And that is not essentially what Namdi Obiezer was saying last week. And so it'll be really interesting this spring to maybe see, hey, after spring ball, after the spring game, who are the guys that are going to hit that next portal window? Who are those guys that are going to look for opportunities elsewhere? Are maybe those some of the guys that Namdi Obiezer was referencing back in February?
Well, I think it's going to be really interesting, as this is kind of the next level of what the transfer portal does to programs, right? We've talked about what it means for coaches. We've talked what it means for numbers. We've talked about what it means for player empowerment and movement. But now you're looking at a guy like Namdi, who was on a team that played for national championship, then was on a team that went 5-7, and is now ending his college career and starting to realize that you've worked with teenagers, I work with teenagers, when you can always have one foot out the door wondering if the grass is going to be greener somewhere else, it's really, really hard to be fully bought in where you are. And I think that this is kind of that iteration now, is that these guys know they can enter the portal and they know they can pursue greener pastures. Whether or not it's going to work out remains to be seen. But, it's after every time that Kaz gets on their ass and yells at them, is a guy going, well, I'm just going to leave then. And I'm sure because some of these kids are immature and, have been told how great they are since they were probably 12, 13, 14 years old. They've been probably the best athlete in their team. It's really hard to get everybody moving the same direction in a way that's even more unique than it was previously. So I love the fact that Namdi came out and said it. I think it's important that he said it. I think it's concerning that it was said, but I think kind of a very different philosophy now with the new coaching staff, but kind of putting it out there publicly, I think is a great lesson in accountability for some of these younger players who might be kind of, towing the edge here. We saw some of those types of kids leave. We're going to probably see a good handful more leave in the spring, but like to your point, like Saban said, it's about what guys get on that bus to go to the airport for game one in a few months from now. And if Namdi can say, as a team leader, an unquestioned leader of this program, hey, you're with us or you're out, and I'm gonna go ahead and air that to the public. I think that says a lot about the type of leadership and accountability he's willing to shoulder himself.
Yeah, fully agree with you there. And he's obviously taking a larger leadership role, which I think is a nice thing to see. Another guy who is taking a little bit of a leadership role is Dom Williams, who was another guy we got to talk to. He was very fun to talk to last week. He talked a lot about hating losing more than he likes winning. And so that he's like, last year was really hard. I hate losing more than I like winning. And he was like, I got frustrated when guys didn't feel the same way. And so, he talked about standards and he talked about wanting to get back on track, but he also talked about some of the young guys that he thought were going to do really well this year. And one guy that he got very excited to talk about was Travis Jackson. And so if we're looking for a defensive lineman to maybe step up and have a fun first year, keep your eyes on Travis Jackson, because he has the Dom Williams stamp of approval.
That's all I want in my life, man. It has been so fun. We got to interview Dom after his first ever college game, the day before his 18th birthday. And his evolution in front of a microphone has been one of the most enjoyable things, because he still is this just like super positive, like kind of just lovable teddy bear type persona. He's super funny and he's really easygoing. But like you said, you can see that he's taking that step to being more of a leader, and there's a little bit more of an edge to him now, and there's a little bit more presence. It's not just, him have like, I'll never forget chatting him up at the national championship game, like press availability, and he was just so happy to be there. And now he's like, no, like this is a kid who potentially has an NFL future and who wants to make sure he's got all the boxes checked, not just for his future, but to make sure that whenever his college career is over, that it ends the way that he wants it. And it's really cool to see him. I mean, literally watch this guy grow up before our very eyes.
Yeah, it's super cool. And one of the things that he and Namdi both talked about too was Andy Avalos and what he has brought to the defensive side of the football already just in his short time here. And Namdi was really interesting in what he said too. He's like, I wasn't sure how I was going to fit in this defense. And so I went to him and I said, where do you want me? And so they're moving him to the will linebacker. He said he had a great conversation with Avalos, who was very transparent and said, this is what we need from you this year. This is what we expect from you this year. And I think that based on what both Namdi and Dom said about Avalos, he's taking a really direct approach to his players. And I think that maybe aligns with some of the stuff that we heard out of Boise State near the end of his time there about how direct he was and how
direct is not an issue. Yeah.
Right. And I wonder if, I just wonder if that kind of approach is going to be good for the players on the defensive side of the ball. This is your responsibility. This is what we need from you. These are our expectations for you this year. And if you can't get it done, someone else is going to get an opportunity. This defense is we've talked about this before when Avalos was hired. The defense is going to be more aggressive. They're going to have more 4-down linemen. They're going to do a lot of really kind of hybrid style things with a spur and a stud hybrid positions. And they're going to get to the quarterback more. That was one thing Don Williams made sure to say. He's like, we're going to get to the quarterback more next year. But I wonder if all of that's going to start from a better, more clear understanding of the expectations, guys' roles, and then having more leadership from the players stepping up and speaking out when they need to.
Well, I think when you have a head coach that's a CEO, a player's coach, a very well-liked, well-respected guy, you need at least one of your coordinators to kind of be an a-hole. I mean, frankly, right? Like, and we kind of come from the past of the head coach kind of being an a-hole, right? When it comes to that kind of a thing. And so you had coordinators that were generally, pretty well-liked, pretty easygoing. And everything we've known about Joe Gillespie is what a well-liked, great guy, how much the players, father figure. But maybe they do need someone to get in there and kind of be a little bit tougher and be a little bit more aggressive and be a little bit more direct and bump that accountability up, because the accountability was clearly what was missing from that team last year, among some other things, talent-wise, whatever. But the biggest thing I think everybody points to is that this was a team that did not look like they had high expectations put on them or had high expectations for themselves, because a lot of the mistakes that they made were simple effort mistakes. They couldn't tackle. That's an effort thing, right? So I think that that this might be the change that's needed, and we'll see if it works out, right? There's a lot to be decided, but from a scheme perspective, I have, like I said, I didn't get to watch all of the interviews straight through. I did a lot of skimming through. I did a lot of time, on Twitter, kind of looking at what people were saying, and I cannot count how many times the word pressure was brought up. It's obviously going to be a lot more aggressive, and if it's going to be more aggressive and take more risks, you need more accountability, and it sounds like Avalos has certainly installed that in the brief amount of time he's been on campus.
Melissa, you know what else is really aggressive?
How are you going to go with this one?
The lineup that Hell's Half-Acre Stadium Goods is presenting to my wallet right now.
That's fair. That's good.
I don't know if you did see, because we talked about it on the last episode, these custom bats, these custom TCU bats that are just begging me to buy all three of them. The new hats, the new hats. For those of our YouTube viewers, this one right here, that is available at hellshalfacresg.com.
The frogs hoodie, the block frogs.
I got the block frogs hoodie. There are a couple other things that are coming soon that I think fans are going to be really excited about, that I got to see a little preview of one thing this weekend, and holy cow, folks, get over to hellshalfacresg.com and just spend some money. Like whatever you get is going to be quality. Whatever you get is going to be TCU oriented, and it's going to make you really happy to have it. Because Hell's Half Acre is a brand that was created with Horned Frog fans in mind, and a portion of all of the money they make goes directly to making an impact for TCU student athletes. Hellshalfacresg.com is the place to go to grab your game day polo, your game day hat, a koozie, some other stuff. Whatever you need, Hell's Half Acre has it. They might even have like furniture and groceries and homes at this point.
Yeah, it could
so just go over there and buy some stuff, and you're gonna love it, and you're gonna look like the biggest Horned Frog fan on the planet over if just whatever you get from Hell's Half Acre.
It's true. It's true.
Melissa, men's basketball has been on quite the roller coaster ride throughout this Big 12 season. I guess we need to roll back 2 games because 2 games have happened since we've recorded. Let us run very quickly through this Texas Tech game that happened midweek last week, because the Frogs lost 82 to 81. They had a 10-point lead with about 6.5 minutes left, and things fell apart in those last 6 minutes by my observation. And I have a reason why after this, but they fell apart because Texas Tech did a great job of getting in the paint, getting some baskets around the rim, drawing fouls, making their free throws. TCU's defense really struggled in those last 7 minutes of that stretch, while the offense missed a couple bunnies, missed a couple free throws, still scored some points and looked good, especially in the last minute or two. But TCU really could not get a stop. And I have to say, in a game where you were already missing Ernest Uday and you had gotten 10 points and 8 rebounds from Assam Mustafa, I'm curious to know more about why Assam didn't play in the last 6 minutes of that game. Because it was Cork, it was a little bit of Jacoby Coles, and we know how much they like having Coles at the 5 from an offensive and a scoring perspective, but you also lose so much when you're trying to rebound and close out a game with defense when you go small ball like that. And it ended up really hurting the Frogs last Tuesday.
Yeah, it looked like they were trying to just score with Tech over the last few minutes instead of really trying to lock down defensively and get stops, which is very antithetical to the normal Jamie Dixon philosophy. And like, listen, like Tech it's a really hard place to win in Lubbock. The crowd was really into it, like blah, 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 all of the reasons, but you cannot have a 10-point lead with less than 7 minutes to go and lose the way that TCU did and just letting Texas Tech do it easily on the offensive end of the floor. And I think Mustafa, we've seen now at these last 2 games what he's capable of. He's a very different player than Uday is, but he's really veteran. He takes up a ton of space in a way that Cork and Coles just don't. He's a good rebounder, and he's just a really smart player. Like, I think he understands his role, and he's not going to take rush shots. He's not going to try to make it about him. He's very content to do his job. And that was a huge reason why TCU was able to run away from Cincy on Saturday that we'll get to. But you said you had a philosophy, you had a reason for why you think TCU kind of fell, or did you kind of address that?
That was it. It's almost nothing not playing.
Okay, like, so that's where you want to say that's a difference maker.
Yeah, if you want a guy, and you just kind of talked about it, he takes up a lot of space, and he's a good rebounder, and he was doing all of those things throughout his season high 19 minutes, which felt like it probably should have been closer to 25, I guess.
Do you think that
for the first 30 minutes of the game?
Do you think that that's just not Jamie Dixon just hasn't seen him in those late game situations enough to have the trust in him like he does probably in Cork and Coles?
I don't know. I probably should have asked on Thursday when we had media availability with Dixon. I was focused on other things, and we got to talk to Ernest too, so I was really kind of more focused on that conversation than I was on why he didn't play in the final 7 minutes. But it's one of those situations where it feels like there have been a couple of times this year where TCU goes away from something that's working to try and get back to the core of what the vision is for the team rather than what the reality is for the team. And it's cost them points. And on Tuesday in Lubbock, I think it cost them a win.
Yeah.
Now, what they did well in kind of the inverse of that was on Saturday, where Cincinnati let TCU run, and in those final 10 minutes of the game where TCU could either let what happened Tuesday happen again or continue the trend of what had been working all day and pull away. They did the latter of those two things. They went on a nice little 8-0 run to make their lead, to turn their 12-point lead into a 20-point lead. They did it with the fast break. They were aggressive on defense. They were forcing turnovers. They were crashing. They beat Cincinnati on the boards, which for folks who maybe haven't watched a ton of Cincinnati basketball this year, they're averaging 9 more rebounds per game than their opponent, and they're averaging over 40 rebounds per game. Those are both top 10 stats in the country. They're leading the Big 12 in both of those stats, and TCU out-rebounded them without Ernest Udeh on Saturday afternoon for an 18-point win. And it was nice to maybe see that TCU kind of learned its lesson in closing out games, where it's like, hey, when it gets down to it, we're just going to do what we do best, and that's we're going to run you out of the freaking gym. Maybe Cincinnati's more susceptible to that than some other Big 12 teams, but it was nice to see TCU assert themselves in that way when they really just needed to close out a home win.
Yeah, and beat the brakes off of Cincinnati's not a bad team, but a team that TCU is better than. And I completely agree. I was driving back from Reno from the coaching clinic I was speaking at, and I was watching St. Francis soccer win a section championship.
Heck yeah.
Heck yes, a section title. They play in the NorCal starting on Tuesday. Go Trubies. A lot of flag football players on that soccer team, just saying. And
everybody was wondering. Everybody was wondering, Melissa, what would happen if the Trubies didn't win.
Yeah. And you know
I guess
what?
We'll never know.
They're still wondering.
I guess we'll never know.
So I was watching that on the NFHS feed. I was listening to the TCU basketball game on the radio. And I was really glad it worked out like that because I got to hear Brian Estridge's interview with Mustafa after the game. And Brian, and I can't remember who the other guy that was on the broadcast with.
Colin Boddicker.
It was Colin. Yeah, it was Colin. So they were going back and forth the final couple minutes trying to figure out who Mustafa reminds him of, like what his player comp was. And I texted Brian. He did not text me back. I'm fine. I'm not upset about it, Brian. It's totally like, I'm over it. Like, I've forgiven you. We're moving on. DeJuan Blair is the guy that an undersized center that should probably be more of a power forward, but doesn't really have the power forward offensive skill set. But a guy who Blair didn't have ACL, so he didn't really leave the ground much. Mustafa has his, as far as I know, but does not leave the ground a whole lot. Super, super crafty around the rim. Understands leverage, how to use his body. I thought it was a perfect player comp. Also, Blair played for Dixon at Pitt, right? So I really thought it was a perfect comp. Apparently, Estridge disagreed with me. Again, totally over it. I'm not taking it personally. Leave me on red, Brian. Like, I'm cool. But
I'm clipping this and tagging him on Twitter.
You absolutely should. But I thought that was a good comp of now, obviously Blair was I think he was an All-American and he was a super elite talent. That's not Mustafa's role or his job at TCU, but I think that there's a lot of that same kind of veteran craftiness that a guy who isn't the biggest guy but understands how to play a little bit above his size and really use his body to create space. And it looks like Udeh may be back Monday potentially for the Baylor game, but if he's not, I think that he's certainly earned the trust of Jamie Dixon, to where if they are in a late game situation again, I think Jamie would absolutely trust him down the stretch in a tight contest.
Yeah, I agree. So on Ernest Udeh, we learned on Thursday that so I know that he had tests done on Monday to kind of see what the extent of the injury was. There was no structural damage. There's no tendon issue, no muscle issue, no anything like that, which is really, really good. And Dixon said on Thursday that he's getting a lot better. It's really just about the discomfort and how do you kind of work your way through that. And it was obviously too painful for Ernest to play on Saturday. Maybe 2 more days will get him in a position with the way that he's been improving to be able to give TCU some minutes on Monday night against Baylor. I do think that they're going to need him a little bit, especially to play against Yves Missy, because that dude is a monster. Even though he's a true freshman, he's been really, really good the last few weeks. Had a couple mistakes in overtime that kind of let the game against Houston get away from him, but is a fantastic center and gave TCU a ton of problems in their first matchup. So you want to be at full strength at the 5 for that game on Monday night. But here's why I think the Cincinnati game was so good for TCU from a national standpoint. Because what I don't think people understand is how much margin of victory plays into the net rankings. And TCU has consistently been like 35 to 42 in the net rankings all year. They were 37 going into Saturday, and they jumped 7 spots to number 30 with one win over a team that now has a 5-9 Big 12 record. That is now 16-11 on the season. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, but they beat Houston and they didn't jump by that much. They beat, Baylor in triple overtime. They didn't jump by that much. They beat Tech at home. They didn't. It's because those were single-digit wins. This was an 18-point win over a conference opponent. I think it counts as a quad 2 win because it was at home. And so they jumped a good amount in the net rankings. They also jumped up to 25 in KenPom from, I believe, 32. And so what this win has done for TCU on the national level from a rankings and numbers perspective is it puts them more in the conversation to get off of that 8 and 9 line, which is going to be so important if TCU wants to make a good push in the tournament a month from now. Well, because you don't want this team running into UConn.
Yeah, you really do not. It also, I love something the Big 12 has introduced this season, and it's the if the season ended today bracket graphics for both the men's and the women's basketball tournaments. That win also, because of some other fortuitous things that happened around the conference regarding TCU, jumped them to a 4 seed, giving them a bye in the Big 12, a double bye, in the Big 12 conference tournament, which would be massive for this team, especially as they get a little bit banged up and try to get guys back fully healthy. So I think that, there's not a lot of basketball left. There's only 2 games remaining, right? But at the same time, there's a lot on the line. And or 4 games remaining, right? 4 games, I think. Yeah, 4. There's a lot on the line for this team. When it comes to not just their national seeding, but their league seeding, their conference seeding, because your national seed, if you win a couple of games in that tournament, and your TCU, a team that's kind of right on that edge of being anywhere from probably a 6 to an 11, depending on what happens the next 2 weeks. It's if they could get that double bye and finish 4th in the conference, that's going to go a long way to perception on a national level.
I fully agree. It starts Monday night with Baylor. Yeah. And there's a secondary reason that you mentioned already why that game is so important. TCU is tied for the 4th best conference record right now at 8-6 with Baylor. Yeah. And so getting that second win over the Bears, holding the true head-to-head card in that 2-game series will go a long way to clinching that double bye. Obviously, you've still got to go to West Virginia and win, which TCU has never done. You've got to go to BYU, who is a legit top 30 team in the country.
20 still ranked.
Can shoot the lights out of the ball. And TCU's perimeter defense has been suspicious at times, so keep an eye on that. And then you host a Central Florida team that went on the road and beat Texas earlier this year. They haven't been great on the road outside of that game, but they just beat Texas Tech last week, and that's part of the reason TCU's in position to have a 4 seed. And so you've got to get through these last 4 games. You have to do it probably at least 2-2, ideally 3-1, if not 4-0, to really set yourself up for a good seed in the tournament and that double bye in the Big 12, which means that, hey, you win 1 game in the Big 12, you're in the semifinals. Yeah. Right? You win 2 games, you're in the title game. That is such a huge boon to get that double bye versus having to start on Tuesday and win 5 games in 5 days to win the Big 12 tournament.
Well, and you're also, you've never won in Morgantown. You want to break that streak, but you've also never finished above 500 in Big 12 play, and that is sitting right there for the Horned Frogs. It is. Yep. I mean, they're 8-6 with 4 games remaining, 2 games at home. It is so within reason for them to get to that 10-win mark in the conference, and 10 wins in this conference this year would be super significant for perception nationally. So there's a lot on the line these last 4 games, and ultimately at the end of the day, you really just want to make sure you're playing your best basketball. And we've seen it with this TCU team. When they are playing their best basketball, they can play with anybody in this league. So if they're playing at a high level, 2-2 to me is the baseline expectation, and 3-1 is not whatsoever out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah. Let's shift over to the women though, because Sedona Prince came back.
Yeah. Madison Connor is back. Sedona Prince came back.
Sedona broke her finger in the first 30 seconds of the game against Baylor in early January. She's missed the last 11 games played, 13 games if you count the 2 that were forfeited earlier this season as well. I saw her in the gym on Thursday when we were doing media availability with Dixon and Mostafa. The women's team was wrapping up practice, and she was getting up extra shots with Mark Campbell, getting ready for Saturday's game. It's kind of how I posted this on the board over at Horned Frog Blitz on Thursday afternoon. I was like, hey, I wouldn't be surprised if Sedona was playing on Saturday because I just saw her working out. And not only did I see her working out, which she's been doing obviously this whole time, but she and Campbell were talking about strategically, hey, if we're going to run this set, that would be a really good opportunity for maybe me to back cut this, that, and the other. Some of the X's and O's stuff that you really talk to a player about when they're getting ready to play in a game versus just getting an extra workout in to try and get back into shape. So was really great to see her out on the court. She had 13 points, 6 rebounds. We're not going to talk about the 7 turnovers.
Yeah,
a little rust there.
Little rust.
But the biggest thing is that TCU women's basketball has now won 3 games in a row. They're sitting there at 5-11 in the conference. They probably need to make a big, deep run. We talked about this last week. They got to make a big run in the tournament or in the Big 12 tournament to maybe have hopes at getting in the NCAA tournament. But the reality is what kind of momentum can this give you as a program to have what happened this year happen? Mm-hmm. And then you finish, first of all, no matter what, they could lose both of these last regular season games. They have 500% more wins in conference play than they did a year ago. And you have all your the majority of your folks back healthy now to really challenge to make a run in the Big 12 tournament. I just think it's a really impressive last couple of weeks for TCU women's basketball, and it would have been really easy for Sedona Prince, because she's freaking Sedona Prince, to have just said, I'm good. Like, team's probably not making the tournament. Jaden Owens got hurt. Madison Connor got hurt. All these other girls got hurt.
Yeah, I'm going to be in the WNBA in a couple of months. Yeah.
I'm just gonna sit this one out. She came back. She worked her ass off. She got ready. She had multiple surgeries on her finger. She rehabbed from all of them to come back and play. And I think that does a lot for a team when one of your leaders and best players is bought in enough to say, hey, the season isn't going the way we wanted it to, but I'm still working to come back and be a part of this thing. That's huge. That's huge. I think that's a big signal of what Sedona Prince's character is overall.
Well, and it's not that long ago that we look back to what an NIT run did to launch TCU men's basketball. Sedona Prince comes back. Madison Connor, it looked a little. She didn't have her best game. The TCU got away with it because they got Prince back. But if those 2 players are healthy and playing, TCU basketball can 100% win a women's NIT championship. Mm-hmm. They can 100% if they get back healthy and they can keep everybody else healthy. This team can make a deep run in the women's NIT. So I think that if they can keep winning now, and they've got a couple games left, it's not going to be easy for them by any stretch. And they've got to go. They've got Texas Tech at home. That's definitely a winnable game. And then they go to West Virginia as well, which is going to be a tough one for them. They got pretty rolled by the Mountaineers a little bit earlier this season, but not at full strength, and they're at least closer to that. So I think that they could easily finish the regular season on a 5-game win streak, or with a 4-1 kind of down the stretch. If they can win 1 or 2 games in the Big 12 tournament, I think they could absolutely earn a WNIT bid, because they're one of the best stories in sports at that point, right? Like everything that they've overcome, the momentum that they've built, the way that they're playing right now, I don't think that them playing in the postseason is out of the realm of possibility, but they certainly need to string together a few more wins to make that happen.
Absolutely they do. Absolutely they do. You know who keeps stringing together wins, Melissa?
I knew. I was saying it in my head, and I almost said it, but then I was like, I just finished talking, so I'm gonna let Jamie take the segue here.
You're such. That was like the opening tip off of the TCU Cincy game.
Yeah, just an easy dunk. I lobbed it over.
Emmanuel Miller just taking the tip, throwing it straight to Micah Peavy for the slam dunk. Like that was perfect teamwork right there. Home Field Apparel, folks, is on quite the streak. With Home Field Apparel, you're going to get some of the softest t-shirts and hoodies in the game, and not just for TCU. I am not wearing it currently because it's like 85 degrees in Texas now, but my Big Sky hoodie is one of my favorite pieces of clothing that I own. You guys see me wearing it on this show more often than not.
All the time.
And that's because it is so incredibly soft and so incredibly comfortable. It fits me perfectly. If you head over to homefieldapparel.com, you can use our code FROGSIN15. That's FROGSIN15 to get 15% off your first purchase, 10% off of your subsequent purchases for all of the TCU gear that you can find on homefieldapparel.com. That is hoodies. That is t-shirts. That is a dad hat now.
Mm-hmm. That is the frog ball raglan tee that if you don't own, you need to have for baseball season.
It is baseball season. Go get it right now. You've got joggers. If you live somewhere where it's cold or you crank that AC at night, you can go get those as well. They've got a wonderful selection of TCU gear over there at homefieldapparel.com. That's FROGSIN15. That'll get you 15% off your first purchase and 10% off every purchase after that. Go to homefieldapparel.com.
Make it happen. And after you pick up that raglan tee, make sure you head out to Lupton Stadium because, whoo boy, frog ball is cooking, Jamie. I watched just about every inning of all three games this weekend.
Yes.
You watched every inning of all three games this
yes.
weekend. My hopes are through the roof right now. This team, I'm still a little concerned about the starting pitching, but I cannot remember a TCU baseball team that could flat out rake like this team has. And they've done it all at home. And even though Lupton is a little bit friendlier of a hitter's park now with the batting eye, it's still really hard to smoke the ball around that stadium. And oh my God, did they do it again this weekend without the benefit of the wind blowing out?
Yeah, there were some baseballs that were incredibly well hit this weekend that did not make it out of the ballpark.
Yeah.
And for UCLA and for TCU. But some fun facts about this weekend. So TCU sweeps the top 20 opponent in number 20, UCLA, to get to 7-0 on the season. That's the longest winning streak to open the season since TCU baseball went 9-0 in 1994. So we're talking about a 30-year stretch where TCU has not had this good of a start to a season, which is so impressive considering where TCU baseball has been since Jim Schlossnagle got here about 20 years ago.
And who they played these 7 games.
Yes, absolutely. A team that won 42 games last year in Florida Gulf Coast, a Texas State team that I don't think people appreciate as being as good as they were. They won 47 games last year, and they were a win away from a super regional. And then, a UCLA team that is incredibly young, but very talented. Mm-hmm. UCLA traveled with 18 freshmen this weekend. They used pretty much all of them to try and find a lineup. John Savage, their head coach, I think is really kind of working through where he wants some of these guys to play and in what order he wants them to hit, because we saw pretty varied lineups through all 3 games, a lot of late game pinch hitting, especially on Friday and Saturday in those 2 close games.
Felt like they played. Was there anybody left that hadn't
there were
gotten on the field by Saturday
There were a
night?
handful of games. There were a handful of guys, but it was interesting because my thought, and I think I said this on last week's episode, was TCU just needs to get in there this weekend and get 2 of 3. Mm-hmm. Well, they got all 3, which was great, but how they got all 3, I think, speaks to the potential of this team moving forward. First and foremost, you won a game on Friday night where you had to manufacture a few runs. You got a little bit of pop and power, but you had to manufacture some runs. You had to protect a very slim lead for the majority of the game. And then you had to go to your closer on Friday night for a 6-out save. Mm-hmm. And Ben Abelt gave you 31 pitches of brilliance to slam the door on UCLA, including a 14-pitch at bat to a guy named Cameron Kim, who is a true freshman, part of the number 1 overall recruiting class that UCLA hauled in last year. Fouled off 9 pitches in a row. And when Abelt talked to us after that game, I kind of asked him what his approach was as that at bat was continuing to go. And he said, guys in that situation tend to think like, I've got to overthrow something here. I've just got to get this guy out. And then they go in and they overthrow. He goes, I was just trying to locate my pitches. He's like, I trust my stuff. And I know that if I put it in the spot I want to put it in, it's going to be really hard for them to hit. And lo and behold, Cameron Kim flew out to left field.
Yeah.
He didn't. I mean, he ate into the pitch count, which made Ben Abelt unavailable on Saturday, but he got it. He did the job. Abelt did the job. He got the out, slammed the door, got that first win. Saturday, in the same inning, you had a push bunt score a run off the bat of Logan Maxwell, and you had a 108 mile an hour, 406-foot home run off the bat of Curtis Byrne in the span of about 6 minutes.
Yeah.
And that speaks in and of itself to the diversity of this offense and the ways in which they can score runs. If the wind had been blowing out this weekend, I think Curtis Byrne's home run would still be going.
Yeah.
He hit that ball as hard as I've seen anyone hit a baseball in a long time. And it was a delight to see. That home run put them up 6-1. The bullpen gave up a pair of runs at the back end of another very good appearance from Braden Sloan. And then with Ben Abelt unavailable and a 3-run lead in the ninth, Kirk Saarloos went to Chase Hoover, and a guy who's never really been in that kind of a situation in college yet. And he just went out and got 3 outs. And it was really nice to see another kid kind of step up in a late inning, high leverage situation. Because now you're thinking, oh man, if Ben has to go really long on a night, maybe we have another arm that we can really trust to step in the ninth inning and figure some things out for us. And then on Sunday, that was just
the craziest first inning I've ever seen in my, like, one of the craziest first innings.
Yeah. The momentum swing in the first inning was nuts. And then TCU got, so obviously for those that didn't watch the game on Sunday, Zach Morris, TCU Sunday starter, struggled with some of the same control issues in the first inning that he did in his first start last week against Florida Gulf Coast. He walked two batters. Those sandwiched an error from Brody Green, which loaded the bases with no outs. He settled down. He got a strikeout and then got a ground ball double play to get out of the inning and keep UCLA from scoring a run. And after that, it was just like TCU decided, we're done with you now.
Yeah.
And they went out and they scored 5 runs in the bottom of the first. Peyton Chatagnier led off with the solo home run, his 3rd of the year. They had RBIs from Curtis Byrne and Carson Bowen, and
who hit the hardest home run I saw hit since Friday night.
He crushed a home run in the 6th inning as well. The Frogs scored 5 runs in 2 different innings. They run rule UCLA to finish the game in 7, get out of there a little bit early. Said it's fine. You can catch an earlier flight back to LA now, and sit here at 7-0, already ranked 5th in the country. And you look around the country, Melissa. Wake Forest lost a game in the midweek. LSU lost a game to Stony Brook this week. Vandy dropped a game to Gonzaga this weekend. Arkansas lost a game. They also won an incredible baseball game. They lost a game.
Ballsy bunt, though. What a ballsy bunt by Oklahoma State in the bottom of the 14th.
So good.
Man, I love that. So good.
So good. And Florida has already lost a game this year to St. John's. And so you're sitting there as a TCU fan and you're like, wow, this is one of the only undefeated top 10 programs in the country right now. Where are they going to be ranked on Monday? I don't think it's going to be one. It's not.
Yeah, I don't want number 1.
I would not be surprised to see Wake Forest, Arkansas, TCU 1, 2, and 3.
I think 3 is fine. I would like to be in the top 5. I don't want to be in the top 2 right now. Mm-hmm. There's a lot. It's a tough schedule ahead. There's a lot of baseball left to play. Let's not start. Got a lot of young guys, a lot of transfers. Let's not get too ahead of ourselves. I am perfectly content being able to say they don't believe in us. Wow, they only think we're the number 3 team in the nation. The disrespect. Like, let's get some bulletin board material. So you talked about the pitchers and the pitching depth and guys that stepped in. I also want to talk about the lineup. Peyton Tolley, we've discussed, just has not quite gotten in sync this year. What a luxury for Kirk Saarloos to be able to go to Jack Basir and see him just hit the cover off the ball for a couple of games. We've seen it's much advertised that right field is a question with Luke Boyers. He's struggled at the plate so far this season. So, why don't we just throw in another freshman in Sam Myers and have him have an excellent game as well? Like, to be able to give guys that might just need a game, like a get-right game or a mental break or whatever else, or a physical break, the flexibility to be able to take guys off the bench, put them into the lineup, and not just see them play good defense, but like to do their jobs defensively, but also to excel offensively. I mean, it doesn't matter what this lineup looks like. It doesn't seem to matter who's in it. 1 through 9, you have to be really, really careful how you pitch the Horned Frogs. And that is, as the pitching starts to get itself together and looks a little bit better, hopefully week in and week out, the fact that this team is very consistently going to put 5, 6, 7, 8 runs on the board has got to be a big source of confidence for those pitchers.
Yeah, this is a really good pitching staff that UCLA has too, especially the starting 3. I think what UCLA's downfall is with their starting rotation, though, is that all 3 guys are right-handed and have similar stuff. And so by Sunday, you're like, oh yeah, I've seen this 92-mile-an-hour fastball with a little bit of action on it. I know what this curveball is going to look like. I know what this changeup is going to look like. And so TCU barreled up UCLA's starting pitching pretty nicely on Sunday to the tune of 13 hits and 8 earned runs in 5 innings. I was surprised that Barnett made it 5 innings, frankly, with the way things started. So good on him to at least battle it out and get through 5. But that was a very impressive front 3 from UCLA that TCU kind of beat up all weekend. And so that gives you a lot of hope moving into another big weekend, or another big week, really, where you host a Washington State team that I didn't see the result from today. We're recording this on Sunday, but they were 5-1 entering Sunday. A nice little team. You're talking about an Arizona team that beat kind of not everybody's, but a lot of national analysts really were high on Northeastern coming into this year. A couple polls had them ranked, and Arizona took 2 out of 3 from them to open the season.
Washington State beat Kansas today. So, yeah. And they've got a top 25.
Well, Kentucky played Kansas today. I don't know. Kentucky beat Kansas
that's
today.
Sunday. Yeah, that score is not posted. Today's score.
It might still. I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyways, Washington State's great. Arizona's really good. And then you go to Arlington, where you're going to play USC twice and Arizona State once. And you're going to watch Texas A&M play baseball as well. And I think that this is a really good spot for TCU baseball to be in after week 2. I mean, you're talking about, and I said this last week on the pod too, this is not a football style schedule where you have to figure things out right at the beginning of the season, or your season's probably not going to go the way you want it to. Baseball is a long season. And for TCU to be playing as well as they are in week 2 doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to sustain throughout the whole year, but it gives you a nice understanding of what the potential of this team is right out of the gate. And man, I mean, just so impressive. I will say too, Sarlos was asked about Peyton Tolley after Sunday's game. He did not play Saturday. He did not play Sunday, as you mentioned. There is no injury thing there. It is simply he's a little out of sorts, is what Sarlos said at the plate, and they just want to help him get a little bit of a breather early on. They're also trying to navigate having a legitimate two-way player for the first time, and there's no, I think, right way to do that. So they're trying to figure it all out with him, and we're probably going to see him play on Tuesday.
I would really like to see him be hit for on Fridays. I'd like to see on days he's pitching. I'd like to see Basir or whoever else fill that DH spot, and because again he looked better on Friday night, but he's still not, I think, to the level I expect him to be mid-season. And so letting him just focus on one thing, and that way if he has a bad outing Friday, I think that would be. And also, like, we got to get some of these other guys in the lineup. Like, it's going to be really hard to keep Basir and Myers and whoever else out of the lineup. So that's one way. But hey, I mean, they pay Kirk the big bucks for a reason. We talk about that depth. You mentioned the schedule ahead. I think it's like 6 games in 8 days, and 5 of them are against Power 5 opponents. And Washington's been good. Washington State's been good. Arizona's obviously has been good. And then the weekend series, USC is not very good, but still going to be. They're still going to have a lot of depth. They can beat you. Yeah. So I think being able to give guys like Tolley and some of these other guys some early rest, to know that you can make defensive replacements for guys late in games, the flexibility that they have in this lineup is going to be huge when you have to play that many games in that many days, and the pitchers getting an opportunity to play in those kind of high leverage situations when you know you're going to have to use a ton of arms over the next week and a half. I think it's a huge deal. And then your reward for surviving that schedule is your first Big 12 series of the year. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, some guys out of the bullpen. Braden Sloan was nails. Zach Coyer was nails. Andrew Mosiello looked fantastic in his one inning of work on Sunday. Cademan Parker gave up a home run, but settled in really nicely after that to pitch another scoreless inning and a half or so. And I think that what we saw this weekend was kind of what you and I were talking about after the first weekend, which is it'll get figured out, it'll get settled. These guys are going to learn what their roles are. They're going to earn what their roles are, and we'll see some improvement from week to week. And we saw pretty much all of that to a T. Is there still room for growth? Absolutely. I liked that TCU starters ate a few more innings this weekend, but I don't think they ate enough quite yet. I think you really want guys to get into the 6th inning, if not the 7th inning, on a regular basis. Which, if you think about TCU starting pitching getting into the 6th and 7th, then holy cow, look at the whole host of options Kirk Saarloos has on any given day in the 7th, 8th, and 9th. And I think it just makes you really strong when your starters are consistently going deep into games. And
I was going to ask you, who's your guest? Who gets to start Wednesday night?
That's a good question. And I asked Kirk about it on Sunday, and he laughed at me like he always does when I ask him about starting pitching. I feel like I'm obligated to do that at this point. Kirk, if you're listening, I'm not going to stop asking you about your starters, but you can continue to laugh at me. It doesn't hurt my feelings that much anymore.
Yeah.
Ben Hampton's obviously going to start on Tuesday. I would say we probably see Luis Rodriguez get the start on Wednesday. He didn't pitch at all this weekend.
Yeah, didn't pitch this weekend.
Another name that has not seen time yet this year is Storm Heyerholzer. And I wonder if maybe he gets a little bit of run on Wednesday as you try to figure out who are we going to use out of the bullpen in the midweek? Who are we going to really need to preserve for Friday night at the very least?
Based on how well he's pitched this season, do you think Coyer gets an opportunity to get the start, or do you think you save him for the weekend?
I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. He pitched in 2 straight games this weekend. He only threw 11 pitches on Friday, and I'm going to do some quick Googling while I vamp to see how many pitches he threw on Saturday, because he went a decent length of time. I think he went a little over 1 inning. He, in fact, went 1.1 innings and threw 19 pitches. So he only threw 30 pitches over the weekend. So, I mean, you're talking about realistically, he could probably start on Wednesday, and maybe you just do kind of a bullpen game on Wednesday too, to give everybody 2-3 innings of work and get some guys some experience that haven't had much yet. But I also think that getting a win, I mean, Saarloos talks all the time about how important these midweek games are from an RPI perspective. And I don't know if you bullpen game a midweek game against Arizona.
Yeah.
Like there are some other teams in the midweek where maybe you can throw a bullpen game together. I just don't know if Wednesday is that one.
So I think Luis probably makes the most sense, because I mean, they stretched Coyer out ahead of the season, right? Like they had him. Was he one of the guys they stretched out as potential? So he could theoretically go 4 or 5, but he's been so good out of the bullpen. I don't know that you want to burn him out and then maybe only get to use him one time over the weekend when you've needed him twice the first 2 weekends of the season. After those. So I'd like to see Luis get the start, but I mean, I think, I imagine Toley's going to get a lot of leash. Klecker's going to get as much leash as he wants. I think Morris still is rounding into form as that Sunday guy. I would imagine that Sunday job could still be very competed for. And so that's an opportunity for maybe someone like Zach or Luis to go out on Wednesday and maybe show that they could potentially be that, in the mix for a weekend starter job. But you also got to give Morris a ton of credit. I mean, what he did on Sunday, he's not afraid. He's not afraid.
He had a rough first inning, and then he went out in the second after that happened, and he retired the side in order. They got a couple runs back on him later in the game, but he looked much better. His fastball he struggled to locate the fastball. He located his changeup really, really well. And I think that he's coming along at a good rate. And I mean, I certainly wouldn't bail on him.
Yeah.
Like there's no reason to do that. No reason to shuffle anything up, because I think he's given you enough.
Yeah.
And if he improves in week 3, like he did in week 2, I mean, we're talking about a guy that's probably pitching into the 6th or 7th inning and striking out 7 or 8 guys. I mean, he struck out 5 guys today. He walked 4, but I mean, the stuff is there with him. The stuff is there. Also, shout out, I didn't mention him yet. Kyle Ayers on Saturday night was the first guy out of the bullpen, and all he did was come in and throw 98 miles an hour.
Yeah.
That is something that TCU has had in spurts, But to have a guy who you can just come in and say, oh, by the way, Klecker's throwing 91 today, maybe 92, and then the next guy you see is throwing almost 100, that is a wildly different kind of ball to hit. And I think that's also some of the reason that UCLA struggled out of the bullpen this week is like everybody seemed to have similar stuff. Cody Del Vecchio was like the one guy out of their bullpen who he was hitting mid 90s, 96-ish. His stuff had a lot of movement on it. TCU really struggled with that, especially on Saturday. He struck out like 5 through 6 innings. And when you have guys who offer a little bit of a different arsenal, it makes it that much more difficult for a guy to adjust, especially in game. And I wonder if maybe that's where some of, because like guy to guy, UCLA's got the dudes, they've got the arms, they've got the bats, but they just kind of go out there and pitch. They kind of go out there and hit, and it doesn't seem cohesive quite yet for them. I will say this last thing on UCLA, because we're already over an hour and I know we want to wrap up. I had the opportunity to sit next to Mike Rooney all weekend long. Mike Rooney of D1 baseball fame, one of, in my estimation, the premier kind of national analysts for college baseball over the last, however long he's been doing this thing. And we were talking about this UCLA team this afternoon as the game was going on. And he suggested that there's a possibility that this UCLA team could do something similar to what TCU did last year, where you had a lot of young pieces, a lot of undetermined roles earlier in the year. Sarlos last year was searching for a rotation, searching for some guys to hit in certain orders. They had obviously kind of the older defensive stalwarts and Braden Taylor and Elijah Nunez. UCLA has really veteran guys up the middle on their infield. But it took a while for all those pieces to fall into the right place. And I wonder if that's going to happen for UCLA this season. I think it could.
I would not be surprised at all if they're hosting a regional.
So they're gonna fall out of the rankings this week because they got swept, and that's what happens when you're a 20-ish team and you get swept. But I wouldn't be surprised to see them hop back in there sooner rather than later, and if not host, probably be a 2 seed somewhere and give somebody fits in their own regional. So it'll be interesting to kind of follow along with UCLA, because that would be it'd be a nice feather in the cap if UCLA turns out to be pretty stinking good, which I think everyone's consensus is that they're going to be.
Yeah, I completely agree. At the end of the day, TCU is 7-0, and they've got a lot of opportunity to pad their resume here before they start conference play. This week is going to be huge. You can very easily be 8-4 or 9-3 by the end of it, but I fully expect for them to continue to show that they can win games in a lot of different ways, and against some really quality opponents to go out and take care of business again. So it's going to be fun. I'm excited for the Globe Life Series. That's always just a great atmosphere and venue, and to just keep playing quality competition. It's a stark departure from the way some other TCU coaches schedule. Not that we're going to call anybody out, and it's a lot of fun for fans, even if it is very, very stressful. It's pretty cool to think how battle tested this team will be before they play a Big 12 series.
Here's the thing. They've already swept UCLA. Say, just hypothetically, they win the next 5. Are they just Pac-12 champions at that point?
Yeah, I guess so, right? Okay. Yeah. I think they have to give them the Pac-12 crown if they beat UCLA, Arizona, and Washington. I guess they probably need to get Oregon State somewhere in there, because that's kind of your premier.
I mean, that's the team to beat.
Baseball team, yeah.
Oregon State's the team to beat. Well, Melissa, this has been quite the treat. Recording a day early because of the craziness of this week's schedule for TCU athletics. But this has been the Frogs Insider Podcast. She is Melissa Triebwasser. I am Jamie Plunkett. Thank you for listening. You can go wherever you get your podcasts and find our show. If you search Republic of Football Network, you will get the entire series of shows in one feed. If you just want Frogs Insider, search Frogs Insider, and make sure that you leave a rating and a review. Hit subscribe on the YouTube channel as well, and follow us on socials. She's at the Coach Melissa, and I am at Frog Preacher. Melissa, I guess we'll talk to him next time.
Go Frogs.
Go Frogs.